Laughter echoed through the grand stone hall, sharp and cruel. A terrified scullery maid knelt before a monstrous king, offering a splintered wooden trinket, while lords and ladies mocked her poverty. They had no idea that this worthless piece of scrap would instantly shatter a century-old demonic bloodline curse. Winterbourne Citadel was a fortress of secrets, built upon the frozen cliffs of the northern highlands. In the year 1342, the icy winds howling through its parapets were nothing compared to the primal, agonizing groans echoing from the royal chambers. King Cedric Whitmore, the alpha of the Highland territories, was losing his mind. For exactly 100 years, the Whitmore bloodline had carried a devastating affliction. History books within the Citadel's locked archives recorded it as a wasting sickness, but the pack elders knew the horrifying truth. In 1242, Cedric's great-grandfather had ruthlessly slaughtered a circle of rogue druids in the Whispering Valleys. With her dying breath, the druid elder had cursed the Whitmore lineage. The parameters of the curse were absolute and brutal. The solstice fever. Every year, as the winter solstice approached, the Alpha's human consciousness would recede. The beast's ascent, the lichen form, usually a source of strength and pride, would become a parasitic entity, twisting the body into a permanent, feral half-state. The final madness. By their 30th winter, the afflicted king would completely lose his humanity, becoming a mindless monster that had to be put down by his own royal guard. Cedric was 28. He could feel the rot in his mind. His bones constantly ached with the urge to snap and reform. Thick, coarse fur had permanently erupted along his jawline and forearms. His eyes, once a piercing aristocratic blue, were now trapped in a glowing, feral amber. He had locked himself in his quarters for weeks, relying on heavy iron chains to keep himself from tearing his own courtiers to shreds. Down in the soot-stained bowels of the citadel, far from the velvet-lined halls of the highborn, existed a completely different world. Linnea Caldwell was a scullery maid. She was 19, with hands rendered rough and calloused from years of scrubbing flagstones with lye and hauling massive loads of ironwood. Linnea was virtually invisible to the werewolf aristocracy. She possessed no grand wolf spirit. Her lineage was allegedly human, a descendant of the refugees taken in by the pack decades ago. Despite the back-breaking labor, Linnea had inherited one peculiar heirloom from her late mother. It was a crude, misshapen knot of pale wood, barely the size of her palm. It looked like a piece of discarded driftwood, but it was impossibly warm to the touch. Faint, worn grooves that looked like ancient runic script crossed its surface. Her mother had made her swear to keep it hidden. "It is the heartwood of the ancient moon tree, Linnea," her mother had whispered on her deathbed. "It remembers what the wolves have forgotten. Keep it safe." Linnea kept it tied around her neck with a frayed leather cord, hidden beneath her coarse woolen tunic. It was her only comfort in a life defined by cold stones and the harsh demands of the kitchen master. As the winter solstice loomed, the atmosphere within Winterbourne Citadel grew suffocatingly tense. The annual solstice offering was approaching. It was a grand political theatre, masquerading as a religious ceremony. High-born lords and ladies from neighboring territories traveled to the citadel to present the suffering Alpha King with magnificent tethers, rare magical artifacts, enchanted jewels, and blessed metals. These gifts were theoretically meant to anchor the king's fading humanity. In reality, they were bribes. The noble who presented the most powerful tether would secure immense political favor, positioning themselves perfectly for the inevitable day The king succumbed to the curse, and a new ruler was needed. Leading this political maneuvering was Lady Giada Halloway. Hailing from the affluent southern plains, Giada was stunning, fiercely ambitious, and entirely devoid of empathy. She had spent a fortune equal to the revenue of 3 farming villages to commission her offering. She intended not just to soothe the beast, but to control it. Her ambition was clear. She would become the Lunar Queen, ruling the north while Cedric devolved into her chained pet. The divide between the two women could not have been starker. While Giada bathed in scented oils and consulted with imported mages to perfect her grand presentation, Linnea was hauling buckets of ash from the great hall's hearths, her lungs burning from the soot, her hidden wooden trinket gently thumping against her chest, quietly pulsing with an unrecognizable energy. The night of the solstice offering was a display of grotesque opulence amidst profound tragedy. The great hall of Winterbourne was illuminated by thousands of beeswax candles. Banners of deep crimson and silver hung from the vaulted ceilings. The air was thick with the scent of roasted venison, spiced wine, and the underlying sharp metallic tang of the Alpha King's distress. King Cedric was brought into the hall, flanked by 6 heavily armored guards. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered nobility. Cedric looked less like a king and more like a captured demon. He was slouched on his massive oak throne, breathing heavily. His hands had elongated into deadly claws, gripping the armrests tightly enough to splinter the centuries-old wood. A thick, silver-forged chain was attached to his heavy collar, a humiliating but necessary precaution. The beast was furiously fighting against his remaining shred of human will. Linnea was not supposed to be in the great hall. Her duties were confined to the kitchens during feasts. However, a sudden draught had blown out the fires in the eastern corridor, and the head steward had viciously ordered her to carry an emergency bundle of ironwood logs across the hall to stoke the hearths. She kept her head down, arms trembling under the immense weight of the rough bark, praying to go unnoticed. At the center of the dais, Lady Giada Halloway made her grand entrance. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, her posture exuding absolute victory. Behind her, 2 burly servants carried a velvet-lined chest. "My king," Giada's voice rang out, clear and sickeningly sweet, cutting through the low growls of the Alpha. "I bring you salvation from the southern plains. Forged by the high mages of Oakhaven, bathed in the light of 3 full moons." She opened the chest. Inside rested a magnificent heavy collar crafted from pure, unalloyed silver, encrusted with blindingly bright crushed sapphires. It radiated a cold, suppressing magic. The court murmured in awe. It was a masterpiece of magical subjugation. "With this tether, the beast within you shall be bound, my king," Giada declared, stepping forward. "You will suffer no longer." Cedric's amber eyes locked onto the silver collar. His wolf, proud and ancient despite its sickness, recognized a cage when it saw one. A deep, chest-rattling snarl vibrated through the hall. The silver wouldn't heal him. It would merely paralyze his feral side, locking him in a state of eternal, agonizing paralysis. As Giada took another step, disaster struck. Linnea, exhausted and struggling with the heavy logs, tried to slip behind the gathered nobles. A footman belonging to House Halloway, eager to ensure his lady had the entire court's undivided attention, viciously shoved his elbow into Linnea's back to clear her from the periphery. Linnea stumbled. The heavy ironwood logs tumbled from her arms with a deafening clatter, echoing like cannon fire in the tense silence of the great hall. She hit the harsh stone floor, her knees taking the brunt of the impact. The sudden violence snapped the frayed leather cord around her neck. Her mother's wooden talisman flew from her tunic. It skittered across the polished stone floor, spinning and bouncing, until it came to a dead stop exactly halfway between Lady Giada's velvet slippers and the Alpha King's throne. Dead silence fell over the court. Every eye turned to the soot-covered maid, scrambling on the floor, and then to the small, ugly piece of wood resting near the dais. Giada stared at the wood, her lips curling into a sneer of utter disgust. She gracefully bent down, picking up the talisman with two perfectly manicured fingers, as if it were a diseased rat. She held it aloft for the entire court to see. "What is this?" Giada mocked, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "Is the scullery bringing firewood for the king to chew on? Or is this your royal offering, little rat?" A few nervous titters broke the silence, quickly snowballing into a wave of cruel, uproarious laughter. The lords and ladies of the court pointed at Linnea, their faces contorted in wealthy arrogance. "Look at it! A piece of rotting bark!" a duke shouted. "Perhaps she wishes the king to play fetch," another lady chimed in, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. The laughter was deafening. It bounced off the stone walls, a cacophony of humiliation. Linnea knelt there, tears tracking through the soot on her cheeks, her face burning with overwhelming shame. She wanted the stone floor to open and swallow her whole. But the laughter did something far worse than humiliate the maid. The high-pitched, chaotic noise acted as a trigger for the frayed nerves of the Alpha King. The beast, already pushed to the brink by the threat of Giada's silver collar, snapped completely. The court was mocking a member of his pack, however lowly, within his own walls. The disrespect, the noise, the suffocating scent of their deceitful magic pushed Cedric over the edge. With a roar that shook the very foundations of Winterbourne Citadel, Cedric surged forward. The heavy silver chain holding him to the throne snapped like brittle twine. The court's laughter instantly turned into screams of pure terror. Nobles scrambled over each other, trampling their fine silks in a desperate bid to escape. Cedric wasn't looking at Linnea. His glowing amber eyes were fixed entirely on the threat. Lady Giada, who stood frozen in horror, still clutching the wooden talisman. The beast vaulted over the wooden table, massive claws extended, ready to tear the southern lady to ribbons. Linnea didn't think. It was pure, foolish instinct. She scrambled to her feet and threw herself between the lunging Alpha King and Giada. "No!" Linnea screamed, her voice cracking. She reached out, snatching the wooden talisman from Giada's paralyzed hand, and held it up with both palms flat against it, bracing for the lethal impact of the Alpha's claws. Cedric's massive, fur-covered hand slammed into Linnea's outstretched palms. His claws met the ancient, splintered wood of the talisman. There was no tearing of flesh. There was no bloodshed. Instead, the very second Cedric's skin made contact with the heartwood of the ancient moon tree, the air in the great hall violently ruptured. A shockwave of blinding, pure silver light exploded from the tiny piece of wood, throwing Linnea backward and knocking Giada entirely off her feet. The sound was like 100 panes of glass, shattering simultaneously. The talisman disintegrated into fine, glowing ash that swirled like a miniature cyclone around Cedric. The ancient druidic magic, recognizing the true heir and the selfless sacrifice of the carrier, bypassed the curse entirely. The dark, parasitic magic that had choked the Whitmore bloodline for a century was suddenly ripped from Cedric's veins. The scent of rotting magic and ozone filled the room, followed immediately by the crisp, clean scent of a winter pine forest. The glowing ash settled into the stone floor, melting away into nothingness. The great hall was plunged into absolute, terrified silence once more. The nobles, cowering behind pillars and under overturned tables, slowly dared to peek out. Where a towering, feral monster had stood a second before, King Cedric now knelt on the stone floor. The thick, coarse fur had vanished from his face and arms. His posture was no longer hunched in agony. He slowly raised his head, breathing heavily, but the breaths were steady and human. When he opened his eyes, the feral, glowing amber was gone. They were a striking, clear, aristocratic blue once again. The 100-year curse of the Whitmore line had been broken in a fraction of a second by a scullery maid's humiliated gift. Absolute stillness claimed the great hall. King Cedric Whitmore remained on his knees, his broad shoulders heaving as he dragged in deep, shuddering breaths of cold northern air. For the first time since his 18th name day, there was no agonizing phantom pain in his bones, no dark, whispering presence clawing at the edges of his sanity. The beast within him had retreated, not out of suppression, but finding true, harmonious balance. Slowly, Cedric pushed himself to his feet. He looked down at his own hands, marveling at the smooth, unblemished skin where coarse, unnatural fur had permanently resided just moments prior. Before he could process the sheer magnitude of the miracle, the sharp click of heels shattered the silence. Lady Giada Halloway, her midnight blue gown dusted with ash, marched forward. The terror that had paralyzed her face only moments ago was entirely replaced by a mask of fierce, opportunistic triumph. She possessed the cunning of a cornered fox and the ambition of a starving wolf. She recognized instantly that a miracle had occurred, and she was determined to own it. "My king!" Giada cried out, her voice echoing with theatrical emotion. She threw herself into a graceful curtsy, bowing her head. "The magic! The high mages of Oakhaven have succeeded. My silver tether has drawn the darkness from your very soul." Cedric blinked, his blue eyes still clouded with the disorientation of a mind rapidly healing from a century-old affliction. He looked from Giada to the heavy silver collar, still resting securely in its velvet chest. It had not moved. It had not glowed. It had done absolutely nothing. Yet before Cedric could voice his confusion, Giada pivoted sharply, pointing a perfectly manicured, accusing finger at the unconscious form of Linnea Caldwell. The young maid lay crumpled on the stone floor, completely exhausted by the surge of ancient magic that had channeled through her. "Seize that wretched creature!" Giada commanded the stunned royal guards. She nearly ruined the delicate magical binding. She threw herself into the ritual, brandishing a piece of dark, contaminated wood in a vile attempt to assassinate the Alpha while his guard was down. The court, still reeling from the shock, eagerly grasped onto Giada's narrative. It was infinitely easier for the high-born lords and ladies to believe that a vastly expensive piece of southern magic had cured their king, rather than accept that a humiliated scullery maid and a rotting piece of bark had done the impossible. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered nobility. "Treason!" a duke shouted, eager to align himself with the woman who now appeared to be the savior of the North. "Throw the rat in the dungeons!" Two heavily armored guards stepped forward, hoisting Linnea's limp body from the flagstones by her arms. Her head lolled back, a smudge of soot and glowing ash smeared across her pale cheek. Cedric's wolf surged forward in his chest, a sudden protective instinct that nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. The scent of winter pine and old magic lingered heavily in the air, wrapping around the unconscious maid. Mate. The word echoed in the deepest recesses of his newly healed mind, a primal recognition that defied all logic. "Stop!" Cedric commanded. His voice, usually a ragged, terrifying growl, was entirely clear and resonated with undeniable alpha authority. The guards froze instantly. He took a step toward Linnea, but the profound physical toll of a century of dark magic, leaving his body simultaneously caught up with him. His vision blurred, his knees buckled, and the world faded to black. When Cedric finally awoke, 3 days had passed. He found himself in his royal chambers, the heavy iron chains that usually bound him to the bedposts notably absent. Sunlight poured through the high arched windows. He was cured. The solstice had passed, and he had not shifted into a feral abomination. However, the political landscape of Winterbourne Citadel had shifted drastically while he slept. The court had fully embraced Giada's fabricated story. Bards were already composing songs in the courtyards about the Southern Lady, whose immense wealth and devotion had purchased the king's salvation. Giada had positioned herself as the Luna in waiting. She had taken over the administration of the castle, issuing orders and solidifying her power base. When Cedric summoned his head of the guard, he learned the grim truth. Linnea Caldwell was locked in the deepest, dampest cell of the subterranean dungeons, awaiting public execution for the crime of attempted regicide and practicing dark, unauthorized magic. Cedric's blood ran cold. His human memory of the event was fragmented, pieces of a nightmare mixed with blinding silver light. But his wolf remembered everything perfectly. His beast remembered the terrifying lunge, the feeling of the heavy claws striking the wooden talisman, and the overwhelming surge of pure, cleansing earth magic that had flooded his veins. The silver collar had done nothing. Giada was a liar, and the woman who had truly saved him, the one his soul now fiercely recognized as its equal, was slated to die at dawn. The midnight air of the dungeons was thick with the stench of mildew and despair. Cedric did not bring his royal guard. He moved through the shadows with the silent, predatory grace of a true alpha, unlocking the heavy iron doors with the master keys he had quietly taken from the slumbering jailer. He found Linnea huddled in the corner of a freezing, windowless cell. She was shivering violently, her coarse tunic offering no protection against the biting chill of the stone. When she heard the cell door creak open, she flinched, expecting the executioner to have arrived early. Instead, she saw the Alpha King. Cedric stepped into the cell, his tall frame dwarfing the confined space. He did not look at her with the arrogance of a ruler, but with a profound, quiet reverence. He unfastened his heavy, fur-lined cloak and gently draped it over her trembling shoulders. "You are freezing," Cedric murmured, his voice incredibly soft. Linnea stared at him in utter disbelief, pulling the rich, warm fur around herself. "Your Majesty, I didn't try to hurt you. I swear it on my mother's soul. I only wanted to stop you from killing the Lady Giada." "I know," Cedric replied, crouching down so he was eye level with her. "My wolf knows the truth, Linnea. Giada's silver did not cure me. You did. But the wood you held, it carried magic older than these fortress walls." "What was it?" Linnea hesitated, fear warring with exhaustion in her eyes. "My mother gave it to me before she died. She said it was the heartwood of the ancient moon tree. She told me we were the last of the Whispering Valley refugees. We are not werewolves, my king. We are the descendants of the Druids. Cedric's breath caught in his throat. The irony was staggering, a cosmic twist of fate that left him reeling. The Whitmore bloodline had slaughtered the Druids of the Whispering Valleys, earning 100 years of unending torment. And now, a century later, the last surviving daughter of that very slaughtered circle had stepped between an alpha and his victim, offering a talisman of peace instead of a weapon of vengeance. The curse had required a genuine act of selfless forgiveness from the wronged bloodline to be broken. Linnea, throwing herself in harm's way, to protect the very woman who had humiliated her, had inadvertently fulfilled the ancient pact. You possess a heart purer than anyone in my court, Cedric whispered, reaching out to gently trace the line of her jaw. A spark of electricity danced across their skin at the contact. Linnea gasped, her eyes widening as she felt the undeniable pull of the mate bond. "Tomorrow morning," Cedric said, his tone shifting into something hard and unyielding. "Giada plans to hold a grand tribunal in the courtyard. She intends to execute you and cement her place as queen. I need you to trust me, Linnea. Do not speak. Let her dig her own grave." Dawn broke over the northern highlands, painting the snow-capped peaks in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The central courtyard of Winterbourne Citadel was packed with nobles, guards, and commoners. A wooden scaffold had been hastily erected. Lady Giada stood at the center of the dais, wrapped in luxurious white furs, playing the part of the benevolent but stern savior perfectly. Beside her sat the velvet chest containing the silver collar, displayed like a holy relic. Linnea was dragged up the wooden steps by 2 guards. The crowd jeered and threw handfuls of icy slush at her, blindly following the narrative fed to them by the southern nobility. Giada raised her hands for silence. "Citizens of the North," she declared, "today we purge the last remnant of darkness from our home. This wretched girl sought to interrupt the sacred healing of your king. She is a practitioner of dark arts, a danger to the crown." "Is she?" The booming, authoritative voice echoed off the stone walls, instantly silencing the courtyard. The massive oak doors of the citadel swung open, and King Cedric emerged. He wore his formal royal armor, black steel trimmed with silver. He looked magnificent, whole, and entirely lethal. Giada's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "My king, you should be resting. I am handling this unpleasant business for you." Cedric ignored her, walking methodically up the steps of the scaffold. He gestured for the guards to release Linnea. Confused, they immediately stepped back. Cedric gently took Linnea's cold hands in his, intertwining their fingers for the entire court to see. Giada's face drained of color. "Cedric, what are you doing?" "I am correcting a century of mistakes," Cedric stated, his voice carrying easily over the stunned crowd. He turned his piercing blue gaze toward Giada. "You claim your silver collar cured me, Lady Halloway. You claim your mages saved my life." "They did," Giada insisted, panic beginning to edge into her voice. "The entire court saw it." "Did they?" Cedric signaled his head of the guard. The guard stepped forward, carrying a live, snarling timber wolf in a heavy iron cage, a beast captured from the wild, completely feral. "Silver suppresses a wolf's nature," Cedric explained calmly. "If this collar possesses the immense magical power you claim, if it is capable of curing a century-old blood curse, it should easily tame a wild beast." Cedric picked up the heavy sapphire-encrusted collar from its velvet bed. He walked over to the cage and tossed the collar inside. The wild wolf sniffed the silver, whined, and then violently bit down on it, trying to drag it away as a plaything. There was no magical glow. There was no suppression. The collar was nothing more than an incredibly expensive piece of jewelry. The court erupted into chaotic murmurs. "Your magic is a fraud, Giada," Cedric snarled, his alpha aura flaring, pressing the crowd into submission. "You attempted to use a fake relic to manipulate your way onto my throne, and when a true miracle occurred, you sought to execute the woman responsible to cover your deceit." Giada backed away, trembling violently. "No! No, she is a witch! She attacked you!" "She saved me," Cedric roared, pulling Linnea to his side. "This woman carries the blood of the Whispering Valley Druids. Her selfless sacrifice, her forgiveness of a bloodline that destroyed her ancestors, is what shattered the solstice curse. She is the true magic of the North." Cedric looked out over his silent, wide-eyed court. "Lady Giada Halloway, for the crimes of high treason, attempted murder, and deceiving the crown, you are stripped of all titles and banished from the northern territories. If you are found within my borders by nightfall, you will be hunted." Guards immediately seized the screaming, thrashing Giada, dragging her roughly from the dais. Her humiliation was absolute, a perfect mirror to the mockery she had inflicted on Linnea days prior. Cedric turned to Linnea. In front of his entire kingdom, the fearsome Alpha King dropped to one knee. He looked up at the soot-stained maid, who had offered him a rotting piece of wood and inadvertently given him back his soul. "Linnea Caldwell," Cedric said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me my life. If you will have me, I offer you my heart, my crown, and my kingdom. Rule beside me, not just as my Luna, but as the bridge between the wolves and the earth." Tears streamed down Linnea's face, washing away the last traces of ash and soot. She looked at the man who had seen through the dirt and the lies to find the truth of her heart. With a trembling smile, she nodded. "I will," she whispered. As Cedric stood and pulled her into a passionate embrace, a deafening cheer erupted from the courtyard. The century of feral shadows was finally over, broken by the most unexpected gift of all, and a new era of unity had dawned upon Winterborn Citadel. If you loved Linnea's bravery and King Cedric's epic redemption, please hit that like button and share this story of betrayal, ancient magic, and true love with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling werewolf romances, dark fantasy dramas, and spellbinding tales. Your amazing support helps us bring more magical stories to life every single week. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite plot twist, and stay tuned for our next wild adventure today.